The Galactic Council chamber pulsed with quiet arrogance as 1,000 alien voices debated in chorus, each convinced of their own species' superiority. At the center of it all, humanity had once again lodged a complaint, something about sovereignty violations in the Sigma-9 cluster. The Council dismissed it with the same bureaucratic smirk they'd used for centuries. Humans, after all, were new to the stars. Loud, chaotic, and emotional. Their contributions to military campaigns and trade expansion were acknowledged, but their defiance? It was irritating at best. The vote passed easily. 17-1. Earth's representative, Ambassador Cowrie, didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead or argue. She simply stood, collected her datapad, and said 9 words that cut through the chamber's drone like a blade. "You've mistaken silence for submission. That ends now." And then she walked out. No formal withdrawal. No protests. No speeches. Just absence. It was brushed off. Earth would return. They always did. The humans love drama. This was probably just another maneuver. Let them cool off. The Council moved on to more pressing matters. Trade regulations with the Yurvan Hive, a piracy spike in the outer shells, the minor rebellion on Drelth. The galaxy was complex, and Earth's tantrums weren't worth more than a footnote. But days turned to weeks. Human embassies across Council territory closed without ceremony. Consulates shut down midday. Representatives left notes reading, "Effective immediately. We are done." No diplomats returned calls. No AI proxies answered hails. The human trade routes, some of the most vital in the spiral arms, went dark. Entire colonies vanished from galactic networks. The Council grew uneasy. Protocol dictated patience, but this wasn't a negotiation tactic. Something had shifted. Humanity wasn't playing the game anymore. The Telari ambassador raised the issue at the next session, voicing concern that humanity's departure could destabilize the fragile economic equilibrium. The Christian delegate scoffed. Let them sulk. They'll come back when they need fuel or medicine. Laughter followed. Earth was resource-rich, but no species had ever survived in isolation for long. But those closest to humanity, trading partners, military allies, fringe colonies with mixed populations, weren't laughing. They were scared, because they'd seen something the others hadn't. They'd seen what humans did when pushed too far. Not loud fury, not visible rage, just quiet, terrifying resolve. Back on Earth, media networks fell silent. No galactic news feeds, no political statements. Ships came and went from orbit in tight, encrypted formations. Civilian chatter all but vanished from the open net. Something big was happening behind the curtain, and no one knew what. The Council's intelligence division attempted to investigate. Surveillance drones were intercepted at the border of Sol. AI scouts sent to monitor Earth's moon disappeared without a trace. An unmanned probe returned, its memory scrubbed clean, broadcasting a single phrase, "Do not return." Whispers of a blackout protocol emerged, an old human contingency plan drafted during the early years of First Contact. No one knew what it fully entailed. Some dismissed it as myth. Others began to believe. Speculation churned into panic. The Datari Confederacy, once comfortable partners with Earth, initiated diplomatic inquiries and received nothing. Not even rejection, just silence. And in that silence, fear festered. The Galactic Council convened a special session, closed door. No recordings, no AI logs, just organics. An ancient protocol reserved for existential threats. And even there, behind all their technology and centuries of diplomacy, the same question loomed like a black hole in every delegate's mind. What happens when the most unpredictable species in the galaxy stops talking? They had pushed Earth off the edge of the table without considering what humanity might do with the fall. The galaxy had forgotten the one thing that had always made humans different. They didn't bluff. They adapted. They waited. And when necessary, they acted without permission. The silence was suffocating. For weeks, not a single word from Earth. No ambassadors. No trade negotiations. No updates on military patrols or diplomatic offers. The usual flurry of activity that kept the galactic system turning was gone. Nothing. In its place, An eerie stillness spread through the galaxy, like a dark cloud that no one could touch, but everyone felt. For the first time in history, a full galactic fleet was left without a clear course. Shipments were rerouted. Data links went dark. At first, the Council tried to make sense of it. Anomalies, delays. But as the silence deepened, it became clear Earth was not coming back. The Clysian and the Mervith systems, once thriving trade partners of Earth, saw their economies grind to a halt. Goods stuck in orbit, unable to reach port. The Uldurai, a xenophobic species who once feared humanity's unpredictable nature, began sending frantic messages, worried that Earth was preparing for war. But there was no war. There were no bombs, no threats, just a deliberate absence. And that, more than anything, was terrifying. The Council's first instinct was to search for a cause. Was Earth under attack? Had a civil war broken out? Was some catastrophic failure at the heart of their systems? They dispatched their best intelligence officers, their finest fleet captains, to the borders of Sol to investigate. But all they found was more silence. Every attempt to reach Earth was blocked, and every sensor probe returned nothing but static. Then, a small fleet of human ships, unmarked and unidentified, appeared on the edges of Council space. They moved silently, no transmissions, no warnings. When Council ships tried to make contact, their signals were jammed, not with malice, but with such precision that it could only be deliberate. It was the first real sign that something monumental was happening, and it wasn't something the galaxy could control. And still there was nothing. No explosions, no sudden military movements, no raids. Earth's vast military might, which had once been a force known across the stars, simply disappeared. At least, it seemed that way on the surface. There was no war fleet amassing on the borders, no grand gesture to announce their power. It was as if humanity had simply stepped out of the galactic stage, withdrawing into some darkened corner of the universe, leaving only questions in their wake. The rumor mill began to churn. Was this some new strategy? Had Earth decided to turn inward, abandoning the Council for good? Were they preparing a surprise offensive? More drastic rumors began circulating. Humanity had grown so powerful, so technologically advanced, that they no longer needed the galaxy's approval. They were retreating, not out of weakness, but because they didn't fear the consequences anymore. They had decided to play by their own rules. In the Clysian Trade Bureau, whispers spread of a new human directive, one that bypassed the Council altogether. The Uldurai began fortifying their borders in anticipation of some unknown human move. Meanwhile, the Therilians, who had long viewed humans as nothing more than an irritating but useful species, began to reconsider their previous alliances, unsure where Earth stood anymore. The panic wasn't about what had happened. It was about what could happen next. The universe had spent centuries learning to predict human behavior, to anticipate their reactions. But now, with no one speaking, with no action being taken, the galaxy was left groping in the dark. A terrifying thought gnawed at the edges of everyone's mind. What if this silence wasn't weakness? What if it was a sign that humanity had something more terrifying planned than anyone could imagine? Then, just as the Council was starting to regain some semblance of control over the situation, the message came. A single transmission, encrypted and direct. A direct line to every Council leader, every ambassador. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a diplomatic plea. It wasn't even an apology. It was a single phrase, encoded with enough complexity to make every translator's systems grind to a halt. The message was simple, chilling. We will not return. And with that, it all came crashing into focus. Earth wasn't just withdrawing. They were severing every last tie, not out of fear or weakness, but out of a cold, calculated resolve. There was no second chance, no diplomatic fallback, no plea for help. Humanity had left the galactic stage, and they had done it with finality. There was no negotiation left to be had. For the first time, the Council understood the full weight of the message. Humanity had always been a force of unpredictability, a species that had always been considered too emotional, too brash, too human for galactic politics. But now, the galaxy was learning a brutal truth. Sometimes, the scariest thing humanity could do was nothing at all. They didn't need the Council anymore. And with that realization, the Council's world began to shake at its very core. The Council was in disarray. In the midst of the galactic markets collapsing and previously stable trade routes drying up, the gravity of humanity's departure began to set in. Panic simmered just below the surface, rising with every passing day as more and more systems realized the implications of Earth's silence. No longer could they rely on the intricate web of human influence that had woven them all together. The message had been clear: Earth was no longer a player in the galactic game. But the real question was, had humanity simply stepped away, or were they preparing for something far more dangerous? In the Grand Council chambers, discussions grew heated. The Olderai representative was the first to speak up, advocating for action, urging the Council to send a delegation to Earth, demand answers, and restore relations. But no one else seemed eager to follow that course of action. The Thrillians, typically known for their brutal military tactics, were cautious, suggesting that any move to provoke Earth could be disastrous. They had seen the human military in action. They knew how quickly it could escalate. The Christian delegate, ever the voice of reason, proposed a more strategic response. Perhaps, he suggested, it was time for a collective show of strength, a demonstration of unity. But again, the message from Earth made this impossible. There was no sign of human military movements, no strange weapons tests, no fleets gathering at the edge of Council space. If anything, their absence felt more like a withdrawal than preparation for war. The silence itself was weaponized. Despite this, the Council couldn't shake the fear that lingered in their thoughts. Could Earth have developed a new weapon? One that no one knew about? Something so advanced, so beyond their reach, that the galaxy was simply too ignorant to see the coming threat? The rumors of humanity's rapid technological growth had circulated for years, but now, they had a chilling ring of truth to them. Some said humans had harnessed the ability to disrupt entire star systems. Others whispered of fleets that could appear out of thin air, with stealth technology that made them invisible to the most sophisticated sensors. And others speculated that humanity had found a way to manipulate quantum forces, making them capable of controlling reality itself. The Council debated fiercely. Should they begin massing their fleets at key choke points? Would it be wise to prepare for a defensive posture? After all, if humanity had decided to act, they would do it quickly, and the last thing the Council wanted was to be caught unprepared. But despite the urgency in the air, no one moved. The silence continued. Meanwhile, Earth's silence was becoming a crisis on the galactic scale. Ships that relied on human trade routes found themselves stuck in limbo. The Clysian sector had already seen a sharp decline in its economy. Goods sat in orbit, unable to be delivered. The Lotharians, a species that depended on human technological exports, began to panic as their infrastructure began to fail. And yet, there were no messages, no responses to pleas for help. It was as if Earth had simply vanished from the universe. Then, something new emerged from the darkness. A new fleet of ships, more advanced, sleeker, and far more sophisticated than anything seen before, emerged from the Sol system. These ships were not of the same design as anything humanity had used in the past. They weren't the same bulky, utilitarian ships that had carried humans into the stars for centuries. No, these are something entirely different. Faster, more agile, and far more dangerous looking. These ships didn't even acknowledge the galactic trade lanes or the established protocols of Council space. They moved through the galaxy with the confidence of a species that no longer needed anyone's permission. The Council was left reeling, scrambling to understand what they were seeing. Was this the human military? Had they been quietly assembling for a massive campaign? Or was it something else? Something far more ominous? The ships didn't fire on any colonies. They didn't attack any outposts. They didn't even respond to attempts at communication. They simply moved, their coordinates constantly shifting, eluding any attempt to track their true purpose. It was as though they were preparing for something. But what? As the days wore on, more fleets were spotted, each one more advanced than the last. And yet, still no communication came. No demands. No threats. Only silence. The fear that had been growing in the council chambers finally reached a boiling point. Humanity wasn't planning a war. They weren't preparing for anything. Instead, they had done something far worse. They had quietly pulled away from the galaxy. They were no longer a part of the system, no longer playing by the council's rules. And yet, those mysterious fleets, those strange ships, seemed to suggest that humanity was still present, still watching, and still capable of anything. The real horror, as the council came to realize, was not that humanity had withdrawn. It was that they had done so without saying a word. The galaxy had no idea what was coming next. And for the first time, the council was left with the uncomfortable realization that they might not be able to control what happened next. Humanity had always been unpredictable, but now they had shown that unpredictability on a scale no one had ever imagined. And it was that quiet, unyielding silence that made the council realize how little they truly understood about the species they had once tried to control. The message from Earth had not been a threat. It had been a declaration, a line drawn in the sand that the galaxy had failed to see. The council, still in a state of chaotic confusion, now faced the weight of an irreversible truth. Humanity was no longer interested in being a part of the galactic order. And worse still, they had proven something that the galaxy had failed to grasp. Humans had never needed the council. Humanity was willing to go it alone. No fleet was preparing to strike. No armies were gathering at the borders of the galaxy. No massive weapons tests signaled an impending war. There was no chaos, no show of force. There was simply nothing. Earth had made its withdrawal without fanfare, without a word. They had severed their ties, and the galaxy's reliance on them had been severed with it. The Council didn't just lose an ally. They lost their position of power. The broadcast that Earth sent out next wasn't a victory speech. It wasn't a challenge to the Council. It was something far more disturbing. The message was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. It explained that the Council had become nothing more than a political machine, a bureaucracy that stifled the freedom of its members and failed to safeguard the core values that humanity once stood for: liberty, fairness, and equality. Earth had watched, quietly, as the Council grew more corrupt and self-serving. And when the moment came, humanity didn't need to participate in the farce any longer. Instead, Earth had something else in mind. Humanity, it seemed, had spent the last few decades quietly building something different, a new system. A system not bound by the Council's limitations, not beholden to the constant politicking and power struggles. A new network of independent worlds, free from the Council's overreach. They had already begun quietly accepting refugees from systems that had been left in the dust. They had built an underground coalition, a parallel network of systems that would no longer bow to bureaucratic control. They would protect those who wished to be free. The message was signed off by Earth's new representative, a leader not recognized by the Council. Their voice was calm, unshaken by the weight of the historical shift they had just announced. They didn't offer threats. They didn't demand anything. They simply explained that humanity had moved beyond the Council, that Earth's vision had outgrown the need for galactic approval. They no longer needed to fight for a seat at the table. They were creating their own table, a new system where every world, regardless of size or power, would stand equally. And in that moment, the galaxy realized something far more profound than Earth's exit. Humanity hadn't simply walked away. They had created something new, something more resilient, more adaptable, and perhaps more powerful than the old Council system could ever be. There was no force, no invasion, no army marching across the stars. Just the quiet promise of something better. The ripple effects were immediate. Governments that had once relied on the Council's protection now turned to Earth for guidance. Systems that had been overlooked or oppressed began reaching out, hoping to join this new order. The old power structures trembled as Earth's message reached every corner of the galaxy. The Council, unable to process the scale of humanity's defiance, found itself divided. Factions broke off. Allies who had long been silent began to speak, questioning the legitimacy of a system that had long served only the powerful. Some argued that Earth had abandoned the galaxy in its time of need, that they had turned their backs on the very systems they had helped to build. But that sentiment was fading fast. More and more systems saw the truth, in Earth's words. The Council had become a tool of stagnation, one that kept species locked in place, unable to evolve. Humanity had recognized that the galaxy wasn't a place to be governed by bureaucracy and fear. It was a place to thrive, to grow, to seek out freedom. On the fringes of Council space, an exodus began. Worlds, tired of being stifled by the Council's policies, began seeking asylum under Earth's new vision. They weren't looking for a war. They were looking for something the Council had failed to provide, the chance to live on their own terms. Earth's fleets, once the enforcers of the old order, now became protectors of a new way of life. One where freedom was paramount, and every species had the right to determine its own future. The old galactic order began to crumble, not through open conflict, but through quiet defection. The Council was left to confront the simple truth. It had underestimated humanity. For centuries, they had seen humans as wild, unpredictable, emotional creatures, unable to be tamed. But now they realized that what they had perceived as chaos was, in fact, the heart of human strength, the ability to adapt, to break free, to build something new when the old system no longer worked. And in the silence of that realization, the Council understood their most fatal mistake. They had never truly understood humanity at all. They had misread them as a species that could be controlled, that could be swayed by the same tactics that worked on others. But humanity had shown them that the greatest power wasn't in violence or control. It was in choosing to leave, to walk away from a system that no longer served its people. And in doing so, humanity had created something far more terrifying than a weapon. They had created the future, and the galaxy would have to learn to live with it.